Hello and welcome. You're watching Explosive Exclusive. I'm Padmaja Joshi. With me, my colleague Siddharth Talia. Viewers, we would have all liked to see Indians winning the Nobel Prize for Peace. Today was the day when that announcement was made. Unfortunately, that award did not come to India. We were informed by Time magazine, no less, that two Indians, Mohammed Zubair and Pratik Sinha, self-styled fact-checkers, were favourites to win the prestigious prize. Time magazine's redoubtable reporter Sania Mansoor told us that they are favourites, and remember that word, favourites, because they were nominated for, quote, battling misinformation in India, unquote, where according to Time, the Hindu nationalist BJP party has been accused of frequently stoking discrimination against Muslims. But if they haven't won today, Siddharth, it is because, and we hate to break this to you, they were never favourites, and possibly they weren't even nominees. Indeed, viewers, India's hopes were inflated by a con job of monumental proportions.
And viewers, over the next few moments, we'll expose this ecosystem of fakery that has been at work. So let's take you through some of the details of what we've actually managed to uncover. Now, on the 4th of October, Time magazine's website, in fact, carried a piece titled, and I quote, "Here are the favourites to win the Nobel Peace Prize 2022, stop quote." Now, among the 12, in fact, individuals as well as institutions that were listed as favourites in this particular article, two names actually caught India's attention. Now, those names were Mohammed Zubair and Pratik Sinha, the co-founders of Alt News. Now, following this particular news piece that was published, there was a flurry of congratulatory messages, and everyone actually hailed it as a win of the right of over wrong and a fitting answer to what many claim is India's fascist dispensation. But here's the thing. The fact-checkers did not appear to actually fact-check any of this adulation and the content of the Time article as well. The principal question here is, was there actually any factual basis for the Time article to claim that Zubair as well as Sinha were among the favourites, Padmaja, to win the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, the answer to that, viewers, is a very, very simple. It's an emphatic no. We decided to investigate this ourselves. We wrote to the Norwegian Nobel Institute, which gives out the Nobel Peace Prize, and it categorically denied. What you see on your screen right now are emails that were exchanged between us and the Nobel Institute. The Nobel Institute categorically denied that there was any shortlist or list of favourites that it had put out, and that these advanced surmises, I'm quoting from what the email from the Nobel Committee said, these advanced surmises are either the product of sheer speculation or information released by the person or persons behind the nomination. Now, a Nobel Committee makes a shortlist. It is never made public for a period of 50 years, since the year that that particular award has been given out. We want to now focus on this email that was sent by us to the project manager, media and the Nobel Peace Prize Forum. Here is what they told us, and let me quote to you again from this email. Proposals received for the award of a prize and investigations and opinions concerning the award of a prize may not be divulged until 50 years have elapsed. Here is the kicker. The Norwegian Nobel Committee does not itself announce the names of the nominees, neither to the media nor to the candidates themselves. So the so-called favourites, even they did not know that they were nominees, leave alone the favourites. Now, in certain cases, names of candidates appear in the media. Fair enough. They appear in the media. How do they appear? These advanced surmises are either the product of sheer speculation or information released by the person or persons behind the nomination. So, these favourites, was it sheer speculation or was it names released by the person or persons behind the nomination? Let's find out in our next part. Okay, so the Nobel Committee has told us that there is no shortlist that they have made public. So what next? We needed to understand that. We have to now tell you about 3 references. This article is very interesting. It says these people are favorites.
Yes.
Where did it get those names from, Siddharth?
So
it made 3 references.
Absolutely. The 3 references are, and the first and foremost, it's the Reuters survey that was carried out in the month of February, Padmaja, a survey of Norwegian lawmakers who make their recommendations voluntarily public, and that's entirely their choice. So Reuters actually managed to get in touch with a series of Norwegian lawmakers who came out with their own lists and their own suggestions as to who actually ought to win the Nobel Peace Prize for the year 2022. So that's the first source. Now, what's really interesting here, Padmaja, is that in the survey that was carried out by Reuters of these Norwegian lawmakers, the names of Zubair as well as Pratik Sinha, according to the Reuters article that we've managed to access and was also hyperlinked by Time magazine and was published on the digital front, it does not reveal these 2 names of either Pratik Sinha or Mr. Mohammed Zubair.
So let me quickly go across straight to the next part and explain to our viewers here. This will give you an idea of where this article got its names from. It quotes 3 sources. 3 sources. One is the Reuters survey, okay? The second is the bookmakers' odds. The third is a PRIO director list. What is PRIO? It's the Peace Research Institute. Any organization in the world. Tomorrow you, viewer, could put out a list. Your organization could put out a list saying, I think Dr. Manmohan Singh should get the Nobel Prize. It is your list. It's your personal list. Anyway, we'll come to PRIO in just a bit. So 3 sources have been named here. Reuters survey makes no mention either of Mr. Zubair or of Mr. Sinha. The bookmakers' odds make no mention of either Mr. Zubair or Mr. Sinha. However, they do mention Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, as the front runners. No mention of these 2 gentlemen here. The only place that they do make an appearance is on the personal list of the director of the Peace Research Institute. Mind you, the director has no formal role in the nomination. He is just a person who's heading an institute. Siddharth.
So that's an important intervention there.
Come on, let's get to the next part. We've already explained PRIO. Now we'll go to the next part. We have established that the bookmakers and the Reuters, these survey make 0 mention of Mohammed Zubair and Pratik Sinha. The only place that they are mentioned is the personal shortlist, like I just mentioned, of Henrik Urdal. Let's show you now the shortlist of the PRIO. So, okay, we've explained to you how this information is flowing. 3 different sources were there. 2 sources have no mention. The third source is the PRIO list. This PRIO list also is a very interesting story, which Siddharth will tell you.
Well, in fact, the PRIO is the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, and they've been cited as one of the sources by Time magazine as the basis to in fact include Mohammed Zubair as well as Pratik Sinha among the list of favorites that the Time article has now listed. We actually got in touch with Mr. Adler of the Heinrich Adler of the PRIO, and he was very categorical in the responses that he in fact gave us. Now he's listed out 5 entries that are his shortlist for the Nobel Peace Prize 2022, and I'll just take you through those names. One of them is Tsikhanouskaya and also Alexei Navalny. These are human rights activists. The second is the International Court of Justice, the institution. Remember, you can actually nominate individuals as well as institutions for the Nobel Peace Prize. The third is Harsh Mandar and Karwan-e-Mohabbat, a prominent Indian mentioned there in the shortlist prepared by the PRIO research director. The fourth is Ilham Tohti, Agnes Chow, as well as Nathan Law. And the fifth are HRDAG and Canvas. Once again, 2 groups or 2 institutions. Now, here's the really interesting bit. Now, when Mr. Heinrich is in fact taking us through his shortlist and also mentions Harsh Mandar in detail, the last 3 lines underneath the paragraph that actually carries a detailed description of the contributions of Mr. Harsh Mandar, there's actually a passing mention of Mr. Mohammed Zubair as well as Pratik Sinha, but this is the important bit. They're mentioned as other worthy candidates.
So now let me show you this shortlist again to just connect the dots for you. Here is the shortlist Let's go to the first 5 names that they mention. Henrik Urdal is the only person who has even fleetingly mentioned the 2 people who are favorites. You would imagine everyone's naming them. No. They are named in one person's personal shortlist, and even there in his supposed shortlist, here are the 5 names that were actually there. If you go through the whole shortlist, and then what they've done, they've made a shortlist. For these 5 names, they have written a paragraph each. So when it comes to Mr. Harsh Mandar and Karwane Mohabbat, that paragraph, and let's go to the next part, that paragraph says, the last 3 lines of Harsh Mandar's paragraph says, other worthy candidates for prize focused on combating religious extremism and intolerance in India are Mohammed Zubair and Pratik Sinha. We are told favorites. Shortlist says other worthy candidates, perhaps in addition to these 5 people who are actually in a shortlist. Let me go across to editorial director Rahul Shivshankar. This basically means, Rahul, that anyone could make a list, and in that you could also feature as another person who also could be worthy. Does that sound like a favorite to you?
Well, let me tell you, Padmaja, first of all, one would have loved to see an Indian win the Nobel Peace Prize. This is not a prize that goes out to an individual as such. It would have made the nation so proud. And you see, what bugs me, Padmaja, is that so much hope was created, hype, hope, and a large number of us were actually looking forward to seeing the announcement today, which took place, of course, at 11 o'clock in Norway. And remember, the Nobel Prize for every other category is given out in Stockholm, but this one is Norway, it's Norwegian Forum, etc. And we actually contacted all of them, and what we were very surprised by, and I think Siddharth wrote those emails, and what he was very surprised by, and he kept telling me how quickly is that they got back to him. The one person who never got back was the Time magazine correspondent, and a couple of questions were asked of her. Siddharth was very pointed. First, we of course wrote to Time, got no response. They have a email, an official email, if you may want to call it that, sort of put out there. We responded, we wrote in, no response. Then we decided that we would ask directly the reporter to confirm who she spoke to, when she spoke to whom, etc., etc. We have not got any response even now. What we did see, however, was a slight slay of hand, so to speak. And I'll tell you a little bit about that a little later. But yes, to come back to the question that you've asked me, what is fascinating is that Henrik Urdal, he doesn't even belong in any way to the Nobel Foundation. He has no say in the committee, etc. Neither have any of his top 5s ended up winning. So when you say yes, anyone could have been asked, I could have also been asked, and I could have listed 5 names. I could have put the name of Narendra Modi, I could have put the name of Rahul Gandhi, I could have put the name of anyone. Now imagine Time magazine will pick up my list of 5 and say, well, these are the people.
Yeah. And
they didn't even write to him to ask on what basis was he making these sort of claims of who was on the short list. And in those 5 names, Pratik Sinha and Zubair are not even there. As you said, they were in some paragraph at the bottom. So any Joe Blow preparing any sort of list cannot become the foundation of a credible piece by a credible media organization. Would we write a piece on who are the Nobel nominees looking at, let's say, Alt News's list? One wouldn't do that, would we? The other important point I want to make, and this is what worries me. You see, Padmaja, and we should talk about it a little bit. This is what Zubair retweets.
Yes.
And this is very important. What does he retweet? In light of Nobel Prize reports, we got this wholesome donation. For us, your support is the biggest award, unquote. Now, I don't want to say this unkind, but was this hype created to boost the prospects of Alt News, to raise money? Because, you know, once you're in that league where you're one of the so-called favorites, forget nominees, favorites, a lot of people will say, well, they must be doing something, let's contribute to their cause, let's make this fight that they have taken on against the Indian government worth it.
So here's the thing, one also wonders, Rahul, what about the people who also participated in it? Here are people who fact check, who didn't do a basic fact check, which we have. Let's quickly recap for our viewers what we know so far. Here, let's put out for our viewers on that flowchart what we know so far. Of the 3 sources that we have, we know that Reuters survey does not mention these 2 gentlemen. Bookmakers odds does not mention these 2 gentlemen. Only person who mentions it is the PRIO director's list, and he in passing says that these 2 are other worthy candidates, which means, Siddharth, the next obvious thing to do would be to go to the PRIO director himself, and that is exactly what we did. We wrote a detailed email to PRIO director and he responded categorically to each question. Here are the main parts. First, we asked him, have you shared this shortlist with the Nobel Peace Prize Committee? His answer, no. It is made available to the press and to general audience from our web pages. This gentleman and his organization are in no way responsible or can even influence who makes it to the shortlist. It is just an organization which puts it out on its webpage saying, hello, these are the 5 people we think are doing great work. It would be great if they get something. Then we asked him second question, does this personal shortlist translate into the Nobel shortlist? He answered no. And then we asked him, Rahul, what you mentioned earlier, and this is the most important question. Did Time seek your response when publishing their names among list of favorites to win the Nobel Peace Prize? His emphatic answer, Rahul, was no. Not only was this a personal shortlist, before picking up these names and quoting them as favorites, the journalist did not even contact this gentleman. His names are just floating around as the favorite. How?
That's precisely what I'm saying here. The worrying part is that a hype was sought to be created. Now, was this with active connivance of X or Y? I don't know. I just find it extremely convenient that Time comes up with an article based on no real information. Some survey on some people who are legislators who didn't even recommend these people. So they were not even on the billet, really, on the ballot to be put up for this poll. So they weren't there. Then you skip to an organization that has no connection with the Nobel Prize Committee, the one that adjudicates on this matter, the jury, etc. No connection. They don't even have the power to recommend.
Yeah.
I mean, how does an organization call these people favorites without doing a fact check? And it's interesting that Zubair and Pratik Sinha call themselves fact checkers. The first thing I would have done was, like there was another journalist who got caught up in a bit of a fraud at one point, I would have done a quick fact check to say, is this some sort of, is this news even, something that I should be retweeting? It was very easy. You could have written to this individual, Mr. Urdal. He would have told you, I am just another organization that makes recommendations. There must be hundreds of them in the world. One. Two, maybe I can write to the Nobel Committee and ask them, do you ever put out the names of nominees? And they would have said, no, we don't. We don't even tell the people who have been nominated that they are nominees. So how is and where does this come out? I would have even written to the Time magazine journalist and said, look, where did you get all this information? Thank you for considering us as the favorites, but where did you get this information from? And she might have volunteered to tell them that, look, I got it from this source or that source, etc., etc. And if they had felt that that was good enough, then they could have perhaps retweeted. But what are they retweeting?
Yes.
A list of some favorites to win based on nominations that were made public via Norwegian lawmakers, bookmakers, odds, and a personal shortlist by the director of the Peace Research Institute of Oslo. A personal shortlist by any Joe Blow. It could be you tomorrow, Padmaja.
Yeah.
And we did ask, to be fair, this individual, do some of your nominees end up getting prizes? And he said on 4 or 5 instances it happened, but it hasn't even happened in the same year.
So, why is it, viewers, that Time magazine decided to elevate Zubair and Pratik Sinha as favorites to win the Nobel Peace Prize when this claim rested on no factual foundation. We then sent a detailed questionnaire to Time magazine as well as the author of the article, Sania Mansoor. When last we checked, 20 minutes ago, we still haven't received a response. I want to take you through the list of the questions, a detailed list of questions that we sent to Sania Mansoor. Question number 1, and maybe Siddharth can also join me to take us through all of those questions that he sent. What is the basis for the Time article to suggest? What was the basis for the Time article to suggest that the names listed were the favorites to win the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize? The second question, and you can join me, Siddharth.
Yes.
The second question that we asked. Go on.
Given that the nominees for the Nobel Peace Prize are never disclosed by the Norwegian Nobel Committee, and that is something that they also confirmed to us, did Time write to the committee or seek to independently verify that Pratik Sinha as well as Mohammed Zubair are among the favorites, according to the committee, to win the Nobel Peace Prize?
The next question that we asked them is that finally the PRIO director's shortlist mentions Harsh Mandar and Karwan-e-Mohabbat and lists Pratik Sinha and Mohammed Zubair as other worthy candidates. If they were listed as other worthy candidates in the PRIO director's shortlist, what was the basis for Time to suggest that they were among the favorites to win? What magic? Here is somebody who's actually among the 5 list in the shortlist, in the 5 names in the shortlist. He didn't make it to Time magazine's favorites, the initial list of favorites. The 2 gentlemen who were there as also worthy candidates suddenly leapt to the top as the favorites, and here's a twist.
A very interesting twist, something that we noticed.
We sent the email when?
We sent the email yesterday, first to letters@time.com,
6th of October.
6th of August at about 10:15 in the morning. And then another email was actually sent the very evening at approximately 5:15 to the author of the concerned article. Now, one of the questions that we also asked the author in that questionnaire, Padmaja, was that in the PRIO description of Harsh Mandar, these 2 individuals are listed as other worthy candidates right at the bottom. So what was the basis for Time to elevate them among the list of favorites? That was part 1 of the question. The other was, why is it that Time did not list Harsh Mandar and the Karwan-e-Mohabbat Foundation itself as part of its prominent list of 12 favorites in the list published on the 4th of October. Now, this was a question that went out from our side to Time magazine and the concerned author yesterday. What we noticed earlier this morning, without any intimation on the part of Time to us.
And she hasn't replied to us.
And she hasn't responded to us. I just checked it about 5 minutes ago. There's been no response from Time back to us just as yet. What's happened is that Harsh Mandar and Karwan-e-Mohabbat suddenly now find themselves among the list of prominent list of favorites listed by Time magazine. That name has gone right above Pratik Sinha and Mohammed Zubair. So a name that was initially consigned to the bottom of the Time magazine article, the Time website article, as other contenders, now suddenly features on top of Pratik Sinha and Mohammed Zubair. And this
so would it
was
be
after
fair to
we
say
pointed
that
this out.
after we sent an email to the author, this change was made?
Well,
the timing suggests so.
Absolutely. It's factually correct to say that the change was actually made after our intimation went to the author. It would be fair for the author to actually acknowledge it and acknowledge the fact that this is something that we pointed out. Unfortunately, that response from Time for any of the questions that we mailed, and it's a fairly detailed questionnaire, has not been forthcoming.
So I want to first again go back to that flow chart that we showed you and tell you in final what we know now of this list of favorites. Here are the 3 sources that were mentioned by the author of this piece. Reuters survey, no mention. Bookmakers odds, no mention. PRIO directors list, they were other worthy candidates, and the gentleman that we spoke to, who is the only one who has mentioned them as other worthy candidates, also said, well, this is not about me. In fact, there were 6 questions that we sent him. We showed you 3. Other 3 questions we asked him in detail. We said, is this about, who should be in the Nobel shortlist? He said, no. This is just me saying as an individual that in these areas, these people are doing a great job. It's as arbitrary as saying that, oh, you know, Siddharth is doing a great job. I could tomorrow put out a list on my website and say Siddharth is doing a great job in journalism. I think he should get the Nobel Prize.
And we also did ask him.
And then somebody picks it up and says, Siddharth is the favorite to win the Nobel. Has nothing to do with it. Nobody asked me. Nobel committee didn't ask me. It doesn't matter. They're not looking at my list. Where did this come up as a Time favorite, Siddharth?
Absolutely. So how was it that Time magazine or Time website in this particular instance decided to just take up the names of Zubair as well as Pratik Sinha that were in fact one of the bottom paras of the shortlist. It was not even part of the shortlist. It was a mention in passing made underneath the paragraphs that were a description of Harsh Mandar and the Karwani.
And I think a very important point that Rahul was making, not just about the takeaways, but about why this was done, Rahul. Why was this done?
Well, look, I don't want to obviously attribute motives to anyone, but look, we all understand how perception plays a huge role in boosting images of people. And look at just what Pratik Sinha had said. And I want us to quickly pull that up. This is what he said. Recognition always helps in many ways, but most especially after the sort of ordeals we had to go through. Certain recognitions made it difficult for the state to go after us. The reports of this nomination, especially one of them, irrespective of the report by Time magazine, it's quite visible that independent outlets in India are doing good work. This must continue to uphold democracy. Now remember, all of this is happening after Zubair got into trouble on 2 counts. With the authorities, one funding, the other one of course being the purveyor of hate in the context of a massive controversy. Obviously his reputation had taken a bit of a beating, some would say, and he has been sort of chafing after that, and you know, he was carted around before the media, you know, by the police, etc. And that always sort of, you know, makes people circumspect about an individual, and it does have a role to play in diminishing someone's faith, lack of a better word, in a journalist or an institution. In this case, of course, alt news. So what better way than to perhaps redeem oneself in the eyes of the public by saying that, look, even the Nobel Committee thinks that we are favorites to win this prize. Now remember one thing, Padmaja, we will never know if they were ever nominated or were nominees, because that list ain't coming out for another 50 years. Right, so this is a win-win. You hype up a Time report which conveniently puts you right up on top, even though no one has actually mentioned you. And even the one person who's mentioned you is not connected with the Nobel Committee. He in fact doesn't even put you in the top 5. It's incidental that none of his so-called favorites, his favorites, have even won the Nobel Prize. So obviously he's not some, you know, he's not like that octopus who predicted the winners in World Cup matches. So obviously he's not even somebody who is, you know, has powers of divinity in any which way. I don't even know if he's credible enough for the Nobel Committee to consider his recommendations. So here you are busy amplifying the works of a magazine that has done a pretty odd, you know, online portal or whatever of Time magazine or a journalist, etc., that hasn't done the due diligence, has not clearly answered Times Now on some very pointed questions. And you build this hype around you. So now for the world at large, because Time has given him this platform, it's a bit like New York Times giving, you know, Indian politicians a huge platform. So globally you become this big player.
So there was validation which came from Time because of the brand attached. Then there was amplification, Siddharth.
Yes.
And one wonders to what end? Secure in the knowledge that you can be called favorites and nobody would be any wiser for the next 50 years. So I can say, hey, you know, I was a favorite to win because Siddharth's personal list mentioned me. And you know what? Time picked it up. So tomorrow if I have a friend at Time who picks up your shortlist for no good reason and says, you know, Siddharth put Padmaja on the shortlist for Nobel Peace Prize, here are the favorites.
And the people, Padmaja, you would have actually expected, given the track record according to a certain ecosystem, to be skeptical of the claims put out by
Skeptical?
Time.
They should have fact-checked it immediately.
But they were more than willing to indulge in the kind of publicity that they were getting. They were retweeting messages.
Indulge or amplify.
And amplify, especially if you speak to an entity like the Independent and say that these kind of reports about nominations actually help our organization and in fact secure us from any designs that the state might have against us. Those are telling claims being made.
That brings us to big questions.
Absolutely. So on what basis? And these are conclusions and questions that we can actually ask based on the lack of response also coming to us from Time. On what basis did Time list Alt News co-founders Mohammed Zubair as well as Pratik Sinha as among favourites to win the Nobel Peace Prize?
Absolutely. And like you were mentioning earlier, how could anyone rank among the favourites when the nominations are shortlisted and are not made public by the Nobel Committee? How do you sit there and divine, saying, well, these are the nominations, and not just the nominations. Here are the favourites. We have declared the front runners. If Zubair and Sinha were only listed as other worthy candidates in the PRIO directors list, why did Time elevate them to the status of favourites?
Absolutely, and it would be the scoop of the century for any media entity, Padmaja, to actually access the Nobel Committee shortlist. They don't release these shortlists. There's a cap on disclosure for a period of 50 years.
More than a scoop, it would be a scandal and a scam.
Absolutely, but for any media entity seeking to actually catch hold of the 5 or 6 names that are part of the Nobel shortlist would be a leak of gargantuan proportions if at all that happens.
Nobel leak. So if there is truth to Zubair, you know, here's the thing. We just did basic due diligence, Siddharth.
Yeah.
Now, here are people, and more power to them. Like we said at the beginning, great work. If you get the Nobel Prize, more power to you. We were like rooting for you as well. But you literally, it's your job to do a fact check. Did it not strike you when the Nobel Committee in its email has told us, nobody gets to know our nominations, including the nominees themselves? Suddenly, if you see a magazine article which says, oh, you're the favourites, wouldn't you step back and say, really, but how? Instead of actually reaching out to somebody and saying, how have you decided that we are favourites? You say, oh, this is great news. This is great news. You amplify it. Why would Nobel Institute refer to it as surmises and sheer speculation in their email if they were indeed favourites?
And it must also be pointed out here that this goes above and beyond the Nobel Foundation's templated responses to questions of this nature. The very fact that they to the word sheer speculation tells us a lot about the kind of article that was actually published.
So basically, nobody bothered to fact check the sheer speculation and surmises, and that really is the bottom of it all. And that's what I want to take across to our guests who are joining us now. We have Sushil Pandit live with us, activist, Rahul Ishwar, also activist, Anshul Saxena, political strategist. We have Lokesh Jindal, leader of the Congress, here with us. Mr. Jindal? Everyone was very happy in your general, big happy family, saying, oh, this is, Nobel is coming to India. 3 cheers and a whoopee. How were they favourites exactly, Mr. Jindal?
Well, it was speculated by a news agency, the manner in which Times now speculates what will be the poll outcome prior to the poll. Similarly, a news agency had speculated the work of 2 Indians, and they had
different, sir. When we do, that is a great comparison. That's a great comparison. But here's the thing: if somebody puts out an exit poll and says, the Congress is going to win 300 seats, nobody starts congratulating, saying, congratulations, you are the next Prime Minister of India, Congress. Here is the difference.
But when you claim a particular political party as favourites prior to election, isn't that also something questionable? On what grounds do you claim that they are favourites?
When you make that claim, okay, Sushil Pandit, what do you make of this analogy? Of an exit poll, if you please. Here's the thing, by the way, sir. We do an exit poll 1 week before the results are to come out, or 1 month when all the votes have been cast, and the results are out within a month, max, 40 days. This is not going to come out for the next 50 years. So we get called out if our exit polls are inaccurate within a month. This fakery was perpetuated knowing कि 50 years तो लेट फिर आप कहाँ हम कहाँ किसको पता?
And what's also important to mention here is that exit polls conduct surveys. They have a certain sample size. They do not rely on independent lists of who's going to actually win the election and elevate the loser or somebody ranked at the bottom to a list of favourites likely to win that particular prize or that particular poll. That's exactly what was done in this particular instance by Time.
What does peace mean to you? Peace is not submission. Peace is not silence. Peace is some form of a harmony.
What?
And an individual which takes up the cause for harmony for the society the way Malal Yousafzai took.
Much as I appreciate your very philosophical and deep thoughts at 6:37 in the evening, that
हार्मनी की बात है। कन्हैया लाल जी से आके बोले आप, कन्हैया लाल के बच्चों
Okay, one at a time, please, one at a time, because it will get lost in the din. I think, Anshul Saxena, I think Mr. Jindal is banking on the fact that we will just get waylaid from the actual debate. The actual debate is about facts, Sushil Pandit. And the central question is, why did nobody pause to think, how are these people favorites? Whose favorites? Whose favorites are they?
Yes. ये मैं तो ये कहना चाहूँगा।
अंशुल जी एक सेकंड, सुशील पंडित से सवाल है। सुशील पंडित जी से सवाल है। Mr. Saxena. Sorry, just 10 seconds. Please let Sushil Pandit start. We'll go all across the table. Yes, Sushil Pandit.
Thank you, Padmaja. First of all, congratulations for a very clinical, threadbare analysis of this fiasco. Kudos, you and your team have worked very hard in bringing out every aspect of it and done a due diligence of a true fact checker. But for someone like me who doesn't have the resources or the time to put on such a thing, it was counterintuitive from the very word go. You know, it was common sense. When you see the biggest misnomer this side of Suez called the Hindu carrying a story, and embedded in that story is divider-in-chief, the Time, and embedded in the Time is a name like Sania Mansoor. You know, this is too much of a coincidence for someone like me to take all this seriously. And finally, the clincher was when someone who hides his face so assiduously gives a full frontal exposure of his face beaming from year to year in anticipation of a prize like Nobel Peace. Now, this was the cherry on the cake. First of all, there are a lot of peace prizes going around begging, you know. You have similar prizes like Ford Magsaysay Award. Even we had one Jawaharlal Nehru Peace Prize.
So, with respect, you know, let's not sidetrack about any of these other awards. Only about these, and again, not to cast aspersion on the author itself. The only issue that we have is, was due diligence done in naming them as favorites, and if not, then why not? That is the central question and the only question as far as we are concerned.
I am entitled to my opinion. Padmaja, we are in an ecosystem where Huma Abedin becomes the chief of the staff for Hillary. We have Ilhan Omar, who drives the Democrats' policy on race relations. And we have CAIR, Council of American Islamic Relations, who condemns Hindu supremacy sitting in US. In that ecosystem, to embarrass India and the current Indian government, you pick up names and you flaunt them for Nobel Peace. I mean, what are you smoking? Come on.
So you're suggesting that there is a larger ecosystem at play in that?
There was a plant stamped all over it from the word go.
So the question obviously remains as to how these two names were picked up.
Okay, Lokesh Jindal wants to respond. Go on.
You know, there is a saying, Naach na aaye angan teda. The point is, the moment you come across some form of a problem, you start blaming the ecosystem. Now, everywhere there is being criticism internationally that the Indian government is subverting democracy. There is a threat to democracy. There is radicalization.
अरे फिर नाच तो कोई नहीं रहा ना. उन्होंने अपना इमेजिन्ड आंगन बना लिया. आंगन तो उनका भी टेढ़ा था. नाच कोई नहीं रहा था. उन्होंने अपना आंगन लिख दिया. that our आंगन is the favorite आंगन. There was no आंगन जिसमें कोई नाचे.
आप आंगन को दोष दे रहे हो ना इकोसिस्टम.
अरे आंगन है ही नहीं भाई. आप कह रहे हैं कि ये फेवरेट है. फेवरेट छोड़िए, वो कहीं है ही नहीं. अंशुल सक्सेना, if you can explain. ये नाच न जाने आंगन टेढ़ा की बात किधर से हो गई? ऐसा तो है नहीं कि अगर उनको नहीं मिलता तो अंशुल सक्सेना को मिल जाता पीस प्राइज.
मुझे नहीं चाहिए. मैं तो ये कहना चाहूंगा कि सबसे पहले जो है जो एग्जिट पोल्स को जो कंपैरिजन किया गया है, एग्जिट पोल्स को जो कंपैरिजन किया गया है, इसके लिए भी मैं चाहता हूं अगली बार मैं ऐसे कंपैरिजन के लिए खुद लोकेश जी का नाम नॉमिनेशन में दूंगा नोबेल पीस प्राइज के लिए कि भाई इनको मिलना चाहिए। इस तरह का कंपैरिजन किया जाएगा कि आप एग्जिट पोल्स के इलेक्शन से आप नोबेल पीस प्राइज को कंपैरिजन कर रहे हैं। दूसरा, पीस की बात कर रहे थे, हार्मनी। कन्हैया लाल के बच्चों से जाके ये बात करिए आप, कन्हैया कुमार के बच्चों से जाके बात कीजिए आप उमेश कोहली के घर वालों से बात करिए। एक वीडियो को किस तरह दिखाकर क्या कराया गया पूरे देश में, और उसके बाद पीस की बात कर रहे हो। ऐसे हिटलर को भी नॉमिनेट किया गया था नोबेल पीस प्राइज के लिए, बिल्कुल परफेक्ट एग्जाम्पल दिख रहा है।
It's important to mention here, Padma, we're not going into whether or not the likes of Zubair as well as Pratik Sinha actually deserve to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. That's another debate to be had at another time. But I have a question for Mr. Lokesh Jindal. Now, the likes of Mr. P. Chidambaram have actually praised Alt News co-founders, both Mr. Pratik Sinha as well as Mohammed Zubair, on multiple occasions. They've written editorials about them. Would you, as somebody who belongs to the same party, has sympathies to the same party, have actually backed these two individuals to fact-check this particular claim made by Time magazine and the Time web portal as well, in the interests of facts, in the interests of truth, as well as transparency? Mr. Lokesh Jindal, would you have actually at least backed Mr. Sinha as well as Zubair to have actually endeavored to expose the truth in this particular matter?
First of all, I am not eligible right now so as to nominate any member to the Nobel Peace Prize nomination. They have their own set of parameters, and I am not aware on what grounds do they say.
Actually, neither is PRIO. Neither is Time to declare anyone a favorite, and yet they did. Editor-in-Chief Rahul Shankar wants to come. I think Rahul Ishwar wants to come.
Just one submission.
Okay, Rahul Ishwar wants to come in for 10 seconds.
Just one submission. Please remember, even Mahatma Gandhi was not given Nobel Prize because he was too nationalist. But on a lighter note, I would, we should be happy if any Indian wins the Nobel Peace Prize. But news is about true representation. There was a mixed representation from Sania Mansoor. That is the fact of the matter. I would urge Pratik Sinha and Zubair to fact check this news and give a right representation, because wrong representation, misrepresentation, exaggerated representation is as good as lying. So please remember, when we are fact checkers, you are even bound to fact check the news regarding
Anshul.
देखो क्लियर ही नहीं है ये सब पूरा तरीका था सिर्फ इस वजह से कि भाई फेक न्यूज फैला दी गई है और उसको एक तरह से फैलाई जाए आगे, जिससे आगे अगर इन पे जो और जगह जगह केसेस चल रहे हैं तो उसमें अगर कुछ एक्शन होगा तो दिखाने के लिए हो जाएगा, देखो हमें नॉमिनेट किया गया था, हम नोबेल पीस प्राइज में थे। इसलिए जब आपके पास पता ही नहीं है, आपको लिस्ट डिस्क्लोज नहीं हुई है, 50 साल बाद पता चलेगा, और जो मेन PRIO ने मेंशन किए हैं उसमें भी 5 नाम, जो मेन 5 नाम दिए हैं उसमें भी उनका नाम नहीं है। तो पहले से ही ये ढिंडोरा ट्वीट किया गया है कि खबर लगाने की
उनका नाम नहीं था।
आप कैसे कह रहे नाम था? आप कैसे कह रहे नाम था? आप बता रहे क्यों नाम था?
आपको नहीं पता।
मैं बोल रहा हूँ मैं बता रहा हूँ PRIO के जो 5 नाम थे उसमें का नाम था ही नहीं, उसमें 5 नाम का नाम था ही नहीं।
Here's the funny thing, आप सबसे पूछ रहे हो कि आपको कैसे पता कि नाम नहीं था। हमारा सवाल उल्टा है, आपको या टाइम मैगजीन को कैसे पता कि नाम था? और उन्होंने तो नाम है नहीं, उन्होंने बोला कि सबसे आगे का नाम है, सबसे ऊपर, सबसे बड़ा।
In that article, she has explicitly mentioned, based upon these reports, the favorites.
But they are not.
I mean,
that was the entire exercise, Mr. Jindal. We went through the 3 sources that she cited: the Reuters survey, the bookmakers' predictions, as well as the PRIO shortlist, which does not mention Mr. Zubair or Mr. Sinha among the 5 about the 5 people mentioned. It actually mentions it underneath a paragraph devoted to Harsh Mandar as other worthy candidates.
Anshul is showing something.
सिर्फ 5 नाम दिए गए हैं PRIO थ्रू, और उन 5 नाम में कहीं ऑल्ट न्यूज का या फिर जुबैर का, प्रतीक सिन्हा किसी का नाम भी नहीं है, जो मेन 5 नाम है। पर लोकेश जी ने अभी से दे दिया है, उन्हें नोबेल प्राइज दे दिया लोकेश जी ने, उन्होंने पकड़ा दिया अभी से, नाम नहीं है लिस्ट में, फिर भी उन्होंने दे दिया।
अरे सर, अभी तो मैंने बताया कि आपके पैराग्राफ में दोनों का मेंशन था।
इट इज ऑल अबाउट टू कवर themselves कि आगे केसेस वगैरह हो, कुछ भी हो तो एक विक्टिम का क्लियर हो जाएगा कि देखो हमें हमारा नाम था नॉमिनेशन।
Sushil Pandit, do you think that a statement should be made of facts by the publisher, the author, as well as the people named?
You are asking for too much. I think these hallowed institutions of media have reduced themselves to propaganda rags lately. And they don't even have the decency of distancing themselves from those who have wormed their way into the innermost, innards of these institutions and are manipulating them day in and day out. So it is highly unlikely that they will come clean on this kind of a job. If they do, I'll be surprised. I'll be very happy to be proven wrong.
Well, we would all love to be proven wrong, because at least a basic description, a basic explanation on how people, and that really, Siddharth, because you've done this entire investigation, your basic premise is that you check facts.
Yes.
Due diligence required that these emails be sent.
Yes.
Like you did.
Yeah.
So could have anyone else. Especially when you're in a nominee, wouldn't you want to write to people and say, hi, I just read of this about myself in an article. Would you, Mr. PRIO, tell me if it's true?
Absolutely. You could have written to the PRIO. You could have also sent, at least as a formality, a mail to the Nobel Committee or anybody else who's a stakeholder to find out whether or not you've actually been nominated. That due diligence was not done. And as and when Time does respond, because we've sent them a fairly detailed questionnaire. In the interest of transparency, we'll also, of course, carry the response that they give us as well.
Absolutely. And remember, we are still waiting. That also doesn't add up. We wrote an email to the author of this piece, got no reply, and suddenly this change happened after our email had been sent. We put the facts out here in front of you. We want you to be judge about whether this whole thing was just a case of oversight, or actually it was planned in the hope that nobody would bother to fact check. Thanks very much, all gentlemen, for joining me. Much more coming up on the other side of a break. Don't go anywhere.